The council chamber was a masterpiece of galactic unity, its oval structure shimmering with the light of 1,000 stars, visible through its transparent dome. Representatives from every corner of the known universe gathered in a cacophony of sound, color, and movement. Despite the chaos of debate, one figure remained unmoving: Captain John Bulldog Mason, Earth's chosen representative in this moment of universal tension. "You're asking us to stop?" Mason's voice cut through the din like a blade, his words deliberate and sharp. "Sorry, but we're just getting started." A wave of murmurs rippled through the chamber. Delegates turned their attention to the rugged human, whose expression carried a defiance rarely seen in these hallowed halls. High Chancellor Zor, a being of radiant energy encased in a translucent exosuit, flared with agitation, his glow dimming slightly in an effort to maintain composure. "Captain Mason," Zor began, his tone measured but firm. "The conflict between humanity and the Crexian Empire has reached catastrophic levels. This council was convened to discuss terms for a ceasefire before the galaxy is plunged into further chaos." Mason crossed his arms, his stance unyielding. "A ceasefire? So they can rebuild their fleets and come back twice as strong? Not a chance. Humanity has fought too hard to turn back now." To his right, the insectoid Martian ambassador, Clicktar, clicked his mandibles nervously. "Captain, you must understand. This war has already cost trillions of lives. Surely there must be another way to—" "Another way?" Mason interrupted, his gaze fixed on the ambassador. "Tell that to the colonies the Crexians bombed into oblivion. Tell that to the families they slaughtered just because we wouldn't bow to them. No, Click. This war isn't about negotiation. It's about survival." The council erupted into overlapping arguments, each species voicing its own perspective. Some advocated for peace, others called for containment of the humans, and a few quietly supported the idea of teaching the Crexians a lesson. Amid the discord, a hologram flickered to life at the center of the room, silencing the assembly with its sudden presence. Emperor Zorx of the Crexian Empire loomed large in the projection, his scaled visage filled with contempt. His deep voice resonated with the weight of centuries of conquest. "So this is the human everyone speaks of. Captain Mason, I had expected more." Mason smirked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Nice to meet you too, Zorx. Did you call to surrender, or is this just another empty threat?" The Crexian ruler's slitted eyes narrowed. "You overestimate your position. Humanity is an annoyance, a pest. This council meeting is a farce. But I will humor you. We offer an armistice. Withdraw your forces and we may reconsider our terms." Mason stepped forward, his boots echoing in the now silent chamber. "An armistice? You mean a pause so you can regroup and hit us harder later? I don't think so. Here's the deal. Unconditional surrender, or we keep coming until there's nothing left of your empire." The chamber descended into chaos once more. Alien representatives pleaded, debated, and shouted over one another. High Chancellor Zor's glow flared brighter as he called for order, his voice barely containing his frustration. "Captain Mason, Emperor Zorx, this council exists to prevent the annihilation of entire civilizations. If you continue this path, it will be the galaxy itself that pays the price." Mason turned to the Chancellor, his voice calm but resolute. "With all due respect, Chancellor, you've had centuries to prevent this. While you debated, the Crexians conquered. Now it's our turn, and we don't plan to stop." The holographic image of Zorx flickered ominously. "You will regret this, human. You and your fragile species will burn." "Maybe," Mason replied, his gaze unwavering. "But if we burn, we'll take you with us." The hologram vanished, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Mason turned on his heel, heading for the exit. As he reached the doors, he glanced back, his eyes meeting Zor's. "You think this is chaos, Chancellor? Trust me, it's only the beginning." The USS Resolute, humanity's flagship and nerve center of its wartime operations, loomed in the darkness of space, its hull gleaming with the reflections of distant stars. Inside its war room, a tense silence reigned. Captain Mason stood at the central console, surrounded by his senior officers, each one a testament to humanity's resolve. On the holographic table before them, a 3D projection of the galactic battlefield shimmered, highlighting critical conflict zones and Crexian fleet movements. Admiral Thomas Wright, a grizzled tactician with years of experience, leaned forward, his expression grim. The Crexians are massing near the Veltrix Nebula. If they consolidate their forces, they'll have the numbers to launch a full-scale assault on our core colonies. General Marcus Hayes, commander of ground forces, crossed his arms, his battle-scarred face set in a frown. And they won't stop there. Once they cripple our colonies, they'll push straight for Earth. We need to strike first. Mason's gaze remained locked on the hologram, his mind racing. They're expecting us to play defense, to pull back and dig in. That's exactly why we won't. The officers exchanged glances, knowing that Mason's bold strategies had been the key to their survival thus far. Admiral Wright broke the silence. "You're suggesting a preemptive strike?" "Not just a strike," Mason replied, his voice calm but firm. "We're going to hit their supply lines, their shipyards, their infrastructure. Cut the legs out from under them. If we cripple their logistics, their fleets won't matter." Hayes grinned, his demeanor shifting. "A classic severance operation. I like it. High risk, high reward." Wright, ever the voice of caution, raised an eyebrow. "And what about the risk, Captain? If we overextend ourselves and they counter, it could cost us the war." Mason looked up, his eyes blazing with determination. "It's a gamble, Admiral, but this entire war has been a gamble from the start. The difference now is that we're not just fighting to survive. We're fighting to win." The room fell silent as the weight of Mason's words sank in. Humanity had been the underdog since the war began, pushed to the brink by a technologically superior enemy, but through sheer grit and ingenuity, they had turned the tide, proving time and again that they were a force to be reckoned with. Lieutenant Sarah Connolly, the ship's intelligence officer, tapped a command into the console, bringing up a detailed schematic of the Crexian shipyards in the Veltrix Nebula. "Our recon drones have identified this as their primary production facility. It's heavily fortified, but if we can take it out, it'll cripple their fleet-building capacity." Mason studied the schematic, his mind already forming a plan. "Admiral, will need a diversion, something big enough to draw their defensive fleet away from the nebula." Wright nodded. "We could deploy a task force to the Draven Belt. The Crexians have a strategic outpost there. If we make it look like a primary assault, they'll have no choice but to respond. And while they're distracted," Hayes added, his grin widening, "we'll hit the shipyards with everything we've got." Mason straightened, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Admiral, prepare the fleet for a dual-front operation. General, ready your troops. We move at first light." As the officers dispersed to carry out their orders, Mason remained at the console, staring at the projection of the nebula. The weight of command pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he wouldn't falter. Humanity's survival and the future of the galaxy depended on it. Hours later, the Resolute led a massive fleet through the darkness of space, its engines burning bright. Mason stood on the bridge, his presence a steady anchor for the crew. Lieutenant Connolly approached, her tone urgent. "Captain, we've picked up a transmission from the Crexian fleet. They're mobilizing faster than anticipated. If we don't act now, we'll lose the element of surprise." Mason nodded, his jaw tightening. "All ships accelerate to combat speed. This ends now." As the fleet surged toward the nebula, the weight of the upcoming battle settled over the crew. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Crexians didn't, an unyielding will to fight no matter the odds. The Resolute emerged from the swirling gases of the Veltrix Nebula like a predator in the shadows. Behind it, the human fleet followed in tight formation, engines dimmed to minimize detection. The nebula's dense electromagnetic field created a perfect cover, but it also left sensors partially blind. Every officer on the bridge knew they were flying into the unknown. "Status on the Crexian defenses?" Mason asked, his voice cutting through the tension. Lieutenant Connolly squinted at her console, struggling to filter through the interference. "Their primary defensive fleet is stationed farther out, but the shipyards are still protected by several squadrons and orbital turrets. It's not insurmountable, but we'll have to move fast." Mason nodded, his jaw set. "Admiral Wright, you'll lead the charge. Break their orbital defenses and clear a path for the ground teams." General Hayes, your troops will neutralize the shipyard facilities. We'll handle this like clockwork, no room for error. Admiral Wright's grizzled face appeared on a secondary screen, his voice a steady rumble. Understood, Captain. We'll draw their fire and keep them distracted while General Hayes gets his boots on the ground. Hayes grinned, the excitement of the battle lighting up his features. Don't worry, Captain. We'll have those facilities under control before they know what hit them. Mason's gaze swept across the bridge. This is it, people, the turning point. Let's make it count. With a single command, the human fleet surged forward, their formation tight and disciplined. The first volley came from the Crexian turrets, bright beams of plasma slicing through the nebula's haze. Human ships returned fire, unleashing a barrage of missiles and railgun rounds that shattered the silence of space. Admiral Wright's ships took the lead, their heavy cruisers absorbing the brunt of the Crexian assault. Shields flared and hulls groaned under the strain, but the humans pressed forward with relentless determination. Smaller escort ships darted between the larger vessels, targeting Crexian turrets with surgical precision. On the ground, the battle was no less ferocious. General Hayes's dropships descended through the planet's atmosphere, weaving through anti-aircraft fire as they approached the shipyard. As the first ships touched down, the ramps dropped and human soldiers poured out, their weapons blazing. "Move, move, move!" Hayes bellowed, his voice amplified through the comms. His troops advanced with practiced efficiency, engaging Crexian defenders in brutal close-quarters combat. Explosions rocked the ground, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of gunfire and the guttural cries of the enemy. Inside the shipyard, the humans encountered a labyrinth of fortified corridors and towering machinery. Crexian engineers and guards fought desperately to defend their stronghold, but the humans were unrelenting. They moved through the facility like a storm, dismantling defenses and planting explosives on critical infrastructure. Meanwhile, Mason directed the battle from the Resolute. His voice was calm but commanding, guiding the fleet's movements like a maestro conducting a symphony. Admiral Wright, shift your focus to their supply ships. Cut off their escape. Wright's cruisers pivoted, unleashing a devastating barrage on the Crexian logistics vessels. One by one, the enemy ships erupted in fiery explosions, their precious cargo reduced to space debris. "General Hayes," Mason called through the comms. "Status?" "We've secured the primary facilities," Hayes reported, his voice crackling with static. "Explosives are set. We're clearing out now." Mason allowed himself a brief smile. "Good work, General. Get your men out of there and regroup with the fleet." As the ground teams evacuated, the human fleet maintained their assault, ensuring no Crexian reinforcements could interfere. The shipyard, once a symbol of Crexian dominance, was now a smoldering ruin. The mission was a resounding success, but Mason knew the battle wasn't over yet. "Admiral Wright," he said, his tone sharp, "prepare for a counterattack. The Crexians won't let this go unanswered." Wright nodded grimly. "Understood, Captain. We'll be ready." As the human fleet regrouped and prepared for the inevitable retaliation, Mason gazed out at the destruction they had wrought. This was more than a victory. It was a message. Humanity was no longer content to fight for survival. They were here to win. The Crexian counterattack came faster than anyone expected. As the human fleet regrouped and began pulling back from the Veltrix Nebula, long-range sensors lit up with the unmistakable signatures of incoming ships. A second Crexian fleet, larger and angrier than the first, had been lying in wait, hidden by the nebula's interference. "Captain!" Lieutenant Connolly's voice was sharp with alarm. "We've got incoming, multiple signatures closing fast. It's a full fleet." Mason clenched his jaw. "Numbers?" "At least 70 ships, sir. Heavy cruisers, carriers, and several dreadnought-class vessels." A hush fell over the bridge. The human fleet, still recovering from the assault on the shipyard, was vastly outnumbered. Mason's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the Crexians, and a direct engagement would be suicide. "Options?" Mason barked. Admiral Wright's hologram flickered to life on the comms. "Captain, we could retreat deeper into the nebula. Use its electromagnetic interference to level the playing field." "Too risky," Mason replied. "We'd lose sensor capability and risk running blind. We need another option." General Hayes, now back aboard his flagship, chimed in. What about those explosives we planted? Did we set enough to chain react through the shipyard's fuel reserves? Mason's eyes lit up. Lieutenant Connolly, confirm. Connolly's fingers flew across her console. It's possible, sir. The shipyard's fuel silos are interconnected. If we detonate them strategically, we turn the entire nebula into a death trap. Mason finished, his voice firm. All right, here's the plan. Admiral Wright, hold the fleet at the edge of the nebula and prepare a defensive line. We're going to lure them in. Wright nodded. Understood, Captain. We'll hold them as long as we can. Hayes, Mason continued, I need a team to re-enter the shipyard and manually trigger those explosives. It's a suicide mission, so I won't order anyone to go. Hayes didn't hesitate. You don't have to. I'll lead the team myself. Mason stared at him, respect glinting in his eyes. You're a stubborn son of a gun, Marcus. Good luck. As the Crexian fleet closed in, the human ships pulled back, their retreat carefully choreographed to draw the enemy deeper into the nebula. The Crexians took the bait, their commanders blinded by rage and emboldened by their superior numbers. On board the Resolute, Mason monitored the tactical display, his heart pounding in his chest. Hayes's dropship disappeared into the swirling gases, heading back toward the ruined shipyard. Every second felt like an eternity. Captain, Connolly said softly, the Crexians are within the kill zone. Mason nodded. Admiral Wright, hold your fire until I give the order. We need to keep them distracted. On the ground, Hayes and his team moved through the shattered remains of the shipyard. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burnt metal. Crexian patrols still roamed the area, but Hayes's soldiers dispatched them quickly and quietly. Explosives are intact, one of Hayes's men reported as they reached the main silo. We can trigger them remotely, but the signal interference is too strong. We'll do it the old-fashioned way, Hayes said grimly, planting a manual detonator. Fall back to the dropship. I'll handle the rest. Sir, one of the soldiers began to protest, but Hayes silenced him with a look. Move, he ordered. That's an order. As his team withdrew, Hayes remained behind, crouched over the detonator. He activated his comms, his voice calm and steady. Captain Mason, charges are set. I'll need a clear signal to detonate. Understood, Mason replied, his voice tight. We'll make it happen, Admiral Wright, open fire. The human fleet unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons and railguns erupted in a symphony of destruction, tearing into the Crexian ships. The Crexians returned fire, and the nebula was soon alight with the ferocity of battle. Amidst the chaos, Hayes's signal came through loud and clear. Charges detonating. Now! The nebula itself seemed to shudder as the shipyard's fuel silos erupted in a chain reaction. Explosions rippled outward, igniting the dense gases and creating a firestorm that engulfed the Crexian fleet. Ships were torn apart in the inferno, their debris scattered like ash in the wind. On the bridge of the Resolute, the crew erupted into cheers as the tactical display showed the Crexian fleet disintegrating. Mason allowed himself a rare smile, though it was tinged with sorrow. Lieutenant Connolly, status on Hayes's dropship? Connolly's face fell. No signal, sir. Mason's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. Understood. Mark them as missing in action. They knew the risks. The battle was over, but the cost was high. As the human fleet regrouped, Mason addressed his crew. We've won a great victory today, but this is just the beginning. The Crexians will come back, and we'll be ready. Hayes and his team gave their lives to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of. We honor them by continuing the fight. As the Resolute turned toward the stars, Mason felt the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. But he also felt hope. Humanity had proven it could stand among the stars, unyielding and defiant. The future was uncertain, but Mason knew one thing for sure. Earth wasn't just surviving. It was thriving, and it wasn't done yet.